Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. This is a place for vibrant discussions about mindfulness, movement practices, and ways to find more balance and presence in daily life. Here you'll find resources to help you progress on your path, as well as insightful conversations with mindful movement, yoga, meditation, and Dharma teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight embodied approaches to mindfulness and the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. This is going to be a somewhat shorter episode, I think. Just me sharing some of what's on my mind and what's sustaining me right now. I promise it's not going to be a rant or a recitation of all the fearful possibilities. And it's not going to be an artificial look on the bright side message either. It might be a little disjointed, but hopefully all the dots will kind of form a picture. And this doesn't really feel like the time for perfectly polished and linear thoughts anyway. So it's about a week after the big election here in the US. I'm feeling a lot of things, and I'm sure many of you are as well. And I'll be honest right off the bat, this is not the outcome I was hoping for, and I'm quite frankly frightened about what it may bring. If you feel otherwise, this might not be the episode for you, and that's okay. This one is a little different because I don't really hide my political views, but I also don't usually make them a focal point of my teaching. While I certainly have opinions and I care deeply about the issues and I care deeply about our class communities feeling safe and inclusive for all, I also respect my students' autonomy and I try not to make too many assumptions about the views they may hold. I want to hope that we can all practice together and find some common ground more often than not. So if you're usually a fan of this podcast but realizing your politics might be different than mine, that's your business. You can listen to this and try to understand my perspective, or you can skip this episode and move on. The thoughts I'm sharing today are for others like me who are upset about the election and who are feeling confused, discouraged, and shaky. And I especially want to speak to my fellow movement, yoga, and meditation teachers out there. I do believe we teachers have an important role to play as people who hold space for others and who create community and connection through our classes. Our classes are a place where people can safely process, reflect, embody, and express what they are feeling. And they get to do that together. So most of the time right now, I'm feeling a sense of purpose and like I want to teach even more, both online and out in my local community. Other times I admit that I would very much love to run off to a secret cottage deep in the forest and just live there quietly tending my own garden and petting my cat for the rest of forever. But sadly, that doesn't seem to be an option at the moment. Lately, my mind spins with what-ifs and ideas. Right now, so much is uncertain. We really don't yet know exactly what this is going to look like. So if you're like me, your mind is trying to prepare for every contingency under the sun, while your body is bracing and your nervous system is bouncing from fight to flight to freeze to other F words. But what I keep coming back to is something in the spirit of this quote that I saw on social media a few days ago. The quote was from Ram Dass, but it was posted by Anne Lamott, who's another wise spiritual writer, and it went like this. I've been asked many times whether this is the Aquarian age and it's all just beginning, or if this is Armageddon and this is the end. And I have to admit, I don't know. Whichever way it goes, my work is the same. My work is to quiet my mind and open my heart and relieve suffering wherever I find it. We might not know exactly what we're dealing with just yet, but we do know what we're about. We do know what our values are and what we care about. Even though we lost this battle, I have no regrets about the time I spent these last few months volunteering, writing letters, and texting voters, trying to reach out and empower people to pay attention and participate. It was a kind of metta or loving kindness practice for me, not separate from my other mindfulness practices. It still gives me a lot of hope to think about how many of us got involved this time in some way or another. Like the day before the election, I attended a Get Out the Vote texting shift, and over 900 volunteers had signed up to help. We pretty much broke the organizer's Zoom account. So there are a lot of us holding a very heartfelt vision for how our country could be better. A lot of us willing to take action to make that happen. And whatever the outcome, it's never a waste to send good energy out into the world and to believe in our basic goodness and decency as human beings coexisting together. Those actions did feel like a form of practice for me, but my teaching of yoga, meditation, and mindful movement has always been my primary form of activism. And it's a quiet activism, not an overt activity of trying to persuade people to my side. Of course, there's a place for that. I'd like to think there are numerous ways to approach making a positive contribution to the world we'd like to see. Buddhist teacher and environmental activist Joanna Macy wrote about there being 3 dimensions of social change, or 3 important roles to be played. The first dimension is what she calls holding actions, or efforts to slow down damage and to protect other beings or the planet itself from further harm. The second one is called life-sustaining systems and practices, and this is where the work is done to create structural change to the systems and institutions in society. And the third one is creating a shift in consciousness. And this is where the work is done to change mindsets and perspectives to help us see the world differently. And this is where we might fit in our role as teachers of mindfulness and embodied movement, where we might be well positioned to contribute. Of course, we can participate in multiple aspects of what she's described, but this framework helps me see my teaching as a contribution to the effort of shifting consciousness and culture. Because I believe that if more people in society had the tools to meet their feelings, balance their nervous systems, and develop awareness and compassion, if more people had spaces to reflect and genuinely connect with others, that these resources would help combat the intense reactivity, ignorance, othering, and hyper-individualism that we're seeing. This mindset that it's every man for himself, and there's not enough to go around, and that scapegoats groups of people as if they are to blame for our struggles. Our practices can actually help us calm down or open up enough to question those stories. And of course, we also need to see people's basic needs being met and things like education and critical thinking and truthful media. But I think it's all connected. So just by doing what we do, perhaps we are in our small ways contributing to that shift in consciousness. The shift towards empathy and integrity and seeing others' basic goodness. That does give me a sense of purpose. And maybe we need to get more creative and find ways to bring these practices to people where they are. Not just the people who've self-selected or had the means to go to a yoga studio or a meditation center. And still, alongside the feeling of purpose, there's also the feeling of, here we go again. I am still tired from the last crisis. I know many people feel this way for their own reasons, especially people with traditionally marginalized identities who've been dealing with that for always. But speaking to my fellow movement, yoga, and meditation teachers who may not still feel recovered from the last crisis, who throughout the pandemic courageously and tirelessly held space for others, even while our own livelihoods were being radically altered, we showed up. It's what we do. And we, unfortunately, have a lot of experience teaching through times of upheaval and uncertainty. That means we have a lot to offer. And yes, it means we're already exhausted. Both can be true. One suggestion I'll make to support yourself to teach and hold space as you feel called is to look for spaces to be in community where you don't have to be in charge or be the leader. Be in a group sometimes where you're not in the front of the room. First of all, that supports others to lead and allows for more perspectives, which we really need, but it also resources you. I'll share a little story as an example. I learned to crochet in the last year or so, and locally we have a sweet little yarn and craft store that's a small business owned by two women, and they hold an open craft night or crafternoon twice a week. I've been enjoying popping in there for a few hours to sit casually and work on a crochet project while others might be knitting or cross-stitching or whatever. It's a pretty diverse and eclectic group with a whole range of identities represented and a really wide age spectrum, from teenagers to women who've been knitting or crocheting for 60 plus years and everyone in between. And everyone seems comfortable to just show up as who they are. So we just work on our projects, chat, sometimes get some advice on a pattern or compare notes. It's fun. So I decided to go to craft night last Wednesday evening, which was the night after the election, because I wanted to be with people. And while Washington State is one of the solidly blue states, our town of Vancouver is more purple, and the more rural area around us is far more red. If you saw on the news about a week before the election where someone set a ballot drop box on fire, that was here in Vancouver. And there was another one just south of us in Portland, Oregon. So the mood was different as we sat with our craft projects last Wednesday night. Everyone seemed tired. Several mentioned that we'd only managed about 3 hours of sleep on election night. The worry and the sadness were palpable. But we talked about TV shows and food, and the person next to me started to explain the differences between millennial and Gen Z internet humor. Fascinating. And then for a moment, the conversation did turn towards the election. And a few comments were made, lots of deep sighs were heard, and it trailed off into a pensive silence. Then someone piped up and said, "Anyone want to hear a joke?" And for the next 10 minutes, silly jokes were flying around the table and everyone was giggling and groaning. I was really impressed that people just had jokes at the ready, but it was very sweet and perfect. It was good for my heart. Because our town might have some who want to burn your vote, but it has more people that want to sit and knit with you and tell you jokes. So that's just to say, go spend time wherever you can be reminded of kindness, humanity, and light. It might not be where you expect. Sometimes you can be in charge and lead the class and guide people to move and breathe and find more ease. Other times you can just sit around the table and listen. All of it might be part of weaving our communities back together in meaningful and heartful ways and creating a shift in consciousness. What do you think? Before I sign off, I will mention some free resources on my website that might be helpful right now. I posted the recording of the first class I taught post-election. When we showed up on Thursday morning, my students talked about feeling shocked and numb, so we did some practices for the nervous system freeze response. So I decided to put that in the free tier of my online class library as a bonus class this month. If you don't know about it, the free tier is kind of like a no-cost mini membership to my class library, where each month there's a rotating selection of 5 video practices. So if you're interested, you can go and find these resources and sign up at movedtomeditate.yoga/class library. Okay, that's it. That's all I've got. I hope it's been helpful to spend some time here today and maybe feel a little bit less alone. Go find your community, both online and in the 3-dimensional world. Thanks for being part of this community. Keep breathing, keep practicing, and keep bringing your goodness into the world in whatever ways you can. I am wishing you well and cheering you on. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend, subscribe on YouTube, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find it that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, courses, or teacher trainings, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. This is Addie D. Hilster. Thanks so much for listening.